Aloha, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Talking with Teal. I'm Ryan Nakade, and on this show, we talk about all things integral, especially with highlighting stories of the interesting things people are doing with the integral model in their lives and in the world. And today, I'm very pleased to be joined by Damiano. So from
Hi
Italy.
there.
Yeah, how are you today?
I'm very well and really happy to be here.
Well, I'm so happy that you contacted me, and I'm really excited for this podcast. And so, just to begin, can you tell us a little bit about your life and how you became interested in integral theory?
Yeah, so I've been interested in meditative practice since I was 14 years old. And what happened is that during my meditative practice, after some time, I realized that there were some gaps. I realized that there were some things that I felt that the meditation was not really helping me deal with within my own consciousness. And what I did is that I began an independent sort of search for what are all the other tools and techniques available to wake up, grow up, and show up, like Ken Wilber would say, right? And and I also have, I think, like a little bit of a similar mental disorder to that of Ken Wilber, which is this obsession for mapping. And I actually, at some point, I was like, the only way I'm going to figure this out is if I map everything. And then about a year later, I found Ken Wilber and I was like, good God, someone else did that. The way I got to Ken Wilber is through a school of rebirthing. Rebirthing is a technique, or it's also called holotropic breathing. It's a very intense circular breathing technique that produces non-ordinary states of consciousness. And it has been my main practice for the 10 years afterwards. And the school that I was working with, they followed Ken Wilber's theoretical model. And just as soon as I found it, I just felt, okay, that's it. That's all I need.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So what I've been doing afterwards is that I've tried to sort of continue in this process of mapping and categorizing all meditative and well-being practices, because I feel that within integral theory, the map is really zoomed out. It's a really large map, but when it comes to actually sort of deciding exactly what practice you should do tomorrow, what thing you should do right now to address with this, and that, it doesn't get as into the specifics as I think it should. Or at least I haven't been able to really found that clarity, so I've just been trying to do that myself. And I'm also an entrepreneur. I have my own tech startup, and I use heavily integral theory to make predictions. As an entrepreneur, my job is to have a sense of where I think the market is going. And so I use heavily integral theory to sort of have clarity about the decision that I'm making in my business.
Awesome. Well, this is a conversation I've been waiting to have. And I want to get all into your entrepreneurial work and so forth. But I thought to begin, could you talk a little bit about, you had mentioned that in your meditative practice, there was some kind of hole that you wanted to fill. And how did integral theory help to fill that hole in your own spiritual life?
So more than help, it kind of gave validation that I was on the right track. So I think one of the things that Ken Wilber heavily talks about, and I think he could do it or it could be done in more detail, but he still hints to that, is that you have these different structures. You have on one hand, waking up, we're all familiar with that, meditation and all those things. But I immediately had this intuitive sense that there was aspects of the self that could only be dealt with other techniques. So I kind of knew that. And so I started looking at, anything that looks at trauma, anything that looks at the past, anything that looks at, other tools. And obviously he's very adamant about saying this, that, you can be enlightened, but you could still be heavily damaged. Whereas the cognitive levels of development component, that's been, I think I've began to understand it a little bit later on, but it has been also very helpful. But I think that this dichotomy between waking up, integrating shadow, and integrating structures that really helped kind of put in place all the different things that I was trying.
I think a lot of people can really relate to that experience. And I think that the insight alone that waking up and growing up and cleaning up are all different axes of development, all independent lines. And so just because you may be high in waking up does not mean that you're high in the other ones. And
Yeah.
I think if every spiritual seeker knew about that from day one, a lot of pain, confusion, and suffering would have been
I
alleviated.
think I 100% agree. And literally any person I talk to when, who are interested in these kind of things, that's the first thing I tell them. Just these are different lines. They're independent. They cross collaborate as Mr. Wilber says, but they are different. And I was lucky enough that I had a sense of that intuitively. And I think many people have a sense of this intuitively. That intuition really guided me in finding techniques that could sort of combine and provide me a more complete approach. And I think there are also things that are missing in these three things, actually. I think that there is a fourth category that is grossly overlooked in both Western psychology and Eastern psychology, which is the part about reimagination and congruency. What that means is that you often hear, either this idea that you sort of detach and, wake up to your non-dual whatever, or you get all these pieces of yourself back, right? You witness all these pieces of you back. But there's a third, the levels, but there's a fourth category. The fourth category is imagining situations differently. This sounds a little strange. And I think that the reason it sounds strange is that it's just not talked about. And very few people actually really need to work on that. And I'll elaborate. What I mean by that is that some people find themselves to have very stressful situations or states of anxiety, right? And what they can do in those states is they can do, one of the three things that we're told we can do. You can witness all that is arising. You can try to sort of play with the shadow. You are the other person. You witness yourself as the other person. Or you witness your thought patterns and levels. But there's a fourth category, which is imagining a much better person to be with. And while this sounds crazy, it sounds a bit strange, what that means is that when you imagine a person, you have a stressful situation, if your mind right away goes to a, say, negative or unpleasant interpretation of that situation, it's because that's the only file your brain has to interpret that situation. So you see, if you're giving a lot of files to compare reality to, if you have very few files, you're only going to collapse reality on that very simple answer. If you have a capacity to say, imagine the opposite. Imagine a situation in which there's an identical person in the same situation who is expressing a much greater sense of appreciation for you. You're feeding your mind new information. You're adding cognitive elements, and then what happens is your mind has to reconcile them. Your mind has to then kind of say, okay, how do I make sense of the fact that I can imagine these two things? And this has actually been proved by other techniques. One technique that I encourage people to look into is called cardiac coherence. Cardiac coherence is this exercise of just imagining something. It sounds really new agey, but it's imagining something really positive within yourself and your body or a situation. And what they've noticed that if you stay long enough within that positive feeling, especially if you're under a lot of stress, that reactivates the brain's capacity to reprocess and heal. And so I found, and this was my problem, that I had a lot of exhaustion. I was always working under extreme exhaustion. And I think 90% of techniques don't work under exhaustion. They block because your brain says, this is not time to heal. This is not time to transform anything. This is the time to just deal with emergency. So to get you out of that, you need to have these little tricks. But then it gets really interesting because then you begin to reimagine anything. So I can reimagine a relationship, but I can reimagine an entire society. And part of the reason we don't have an integral society is because we haven't spent enough time imagining it. So you see how the concept of imagination is that idea of feeding more information to your mind so that it begins to fill the gaps. And to conclude on this last item, what I've noticed is that if you use techniques like eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing, I don't know if you're familiar with it, it's a technique to heal traumas. I've done it, so I get a sense of how it feels when it's working. What I've been noticing is that this activity of reprogramming actually triggers the same experience when eye movements are not working. So it kind of validates this logic of adding information to your brain capacity to reprocess. So this is sort of the things that I obsess about. to kind of hack my way to consciousness and well-being, and it's just a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It sounds like a very specific technique or practice that really harnesses your creativity and imagination. I guess my one question that I would have from that, and this is perhaps coming from kind of a more Zen Buddhist perspective, is I can definitely see the value of imagination. And in my study of philosophy, of course, there's a lot of use in imagination for conjuring up thought experiments, right? So imagination in that sense is...
And we're talking about thought experiments ultimately, yes.
Right. I guess my question is, if you're using this as a practical technique, how do you make sure that you don't become too like delusional? Like you had mentioned the kind of a new age.
I agree. Yeah.
You start imagining something that's completely different from reality as it is.
So first of all, I would question your statement of reality as it is, because we're still talking about what manifests in your head. So when you close your eyes and you think of something, that's still an illusion, as much as the positive one. But the problem is that, and I think that your point is a very valid point, is an obvious point. But I think that this very point is the reason why this fourth technique hasn't been included in the current adopted models. Because Western psychologists say, no, that's delusional. Buddhists say, no, that's attachment. Like we don't want more of that, right? Mm-hmm. And developmental psychologists say, why do you need that? Like, I can explain you how the mind works. And actually, the people who actually got this technique are the worst ones, which are salespeople. So to validate even more your concern about why this is problematic, you find these kind of concepts about congruency. If you look into all those, and I hate those guys, not I hate those guys, but I have my own allergy to them, which is your Anthony Robbins and your motivational speakers and all those guys. But as our favorite philosopher says, nobody's 100% wrong. And I think that there was a truth in what those people were doing, driven by heaps of ego, driven by, I need to sell more, so I need to hack my brain to sell more, right? But the thing is that an ego is an ego, whether it looks good or looks bad. And we're always happy to kill good egos, and sometimes we're embarrassed to kill bad egos. So the process of imagining a radically different self, because you can also get to imagine a perfect version of yourself. And if you're entrenched in a negative version, that's going to shake your ego just as much. And so I have this hope that the brain is intelligent enough, once you give it enough information, to collapse on the most plausible reality. Like I don't think you can make your brain crazy by simply thinking positive, but you should not get addicted to it. It should not become a refuge from seeing things as they are. And actually, the way I suggest to do this kind of technique is exactly as a ping pong, where you imagine the most positive scenario possible until that state of mind is just, you don't need to imagine that anymore to feel good. And then what happens, and this is quite interesting, is that the negative sensations, emotions, they begin arising again. But this time, it's just so much easier to digest them. It's so much easier to witness them. So it's a bit of a hack for those really hard things to witness, to go through. And I'm not saying that I've mastered this thing, but I have been practiced long enough to attest that I think this is a really important area of exploration. And also the thing is that, can you really, Zen is right with the concept of congruency. When they say you're already enlightened, what they're telling you is, dude, stop identifying with a not enlightened guy. Break that ego as well. When they say you need to enlighten here and now, you need to have the balls to say, I'm enlightened here and now. Like I decide to do it in this moment and forever, right? Which has a strong arrogance to it, but you can't do it otherwise. Like you can't awaken in the here and now if a part of your mind says, no, that's impossible. Or it's going to be a lot harder to. So this is, ultimately, it's not the final truth, but it's just an additional way to shake the ego. It's an additional way to shake your mind into thinking different things. And if you, generally, I think the main assumption of enlightenment is if you shake your mind enough, you're going to wake up. And this is just an additional way to shake it.
Yeah. And, I'm also reminded of not only these sales guys that we tend to despise, but also a lot of athletes and peak performance coaches and so forth use a lot of visualization,
Absolutely.
imagination, and you know, I
But they are really performing well at what you're doing, at what they're doing. And so if you want to become enlightened and you want to be a peak enlightener, maybe there is some truth to what they're doing that we can take.
Yeah. And you know, that's also very much congenial with Tibetan Buddhist practices or other kind of tantric practices where there's a lot of visualization of deities, visualization of mandala patterns.
Absolutely.
To try to form a relationship or even become one with the entity and to kind of reconfigure the way that you conceive of your identity. So I think there's a lot of value in that kind of practice.
And it is ultimately it's the value of third person religions, third person religions. Like, I don't want this to sound like a negative thing, but like take the figure of Jesus Christ. It's like the dude is freaking perfect in the general consciousness. And if that dude loves you and forgives you, like that's it. Your mind has to reconcile the fact that thing can happen. And the thing is that one of the things also that sometimes I think gurus are crap at reverse engineering how they got enlightened. And one of the things that you'll hear Mr. Wilbur say that as well is like, you want to get enlightened, find a guru. And part of the value of gurus is that they are that person. They are that self that looks at you and you see in that self that infinite love, compassion, awareness that wakes you up because your brain has to reconcile that. The problem is that A, gurus are very dangerous. We've seen that heavily. B, there's not that many of them. And C, if you can do it on your own, also do it on your own. I'm not saying don't find a guru, but you can really re-engineer a lot of the value of that relationship through imagination of all.
Right. Yeah. and this is actually a great segue into your work in entrepreneurship. And I had listened to, I think it was one of your talks on SoundCloud where you talked about the value of altered states of consciousness. And so can you just speak a little bit about, first of all, what do you do?
So I hyperventilate a lot, essentially. That's what I do. In a sense, holotropic breathing. I don't know if have you ever experienced like holotropic breathing or rebirthing or breath work?
Like by Stan Grof's holotropic?
Yeah, exactly. That stuff. Yeah. Have you tried?
I tried watching a YouTube video and hyperventilating on my own, so I don't not really like it.
Yeah, it is one of those techniques that is probably the hardest to do on your own for various reasons. But I was lucky enough to suffer enough to want to put myself through that. So, and on a consistent base. And I think that I would say more the category of conscious connected breathing has a huge potential. I think it has one of the most untapped potential, and you see so many different variations. You see also, Wim Hof, the guy he's a guy who trains on doing cold showers and like hacking your immune system with conscious connected breathing and cold. So it's coming in many shapes and sizes, but I think that conscious connected breathing is the best way to get people onto non-ordinary states of consciousness easily, quickly, efficiently, while also dealing with shadow elements and past elements. So it's really effective because it gets you to peak states. It doesn't get you there before you've dealt with a bunch of psychological things. So it also kind of is a good safeguard. And it allows you to get, obviously there are milder states opposed to what I assume people who do psychedelics would experience, but it's a good way in between. So what this technique in particular allowed me is a very rapid resolving of certain issues that I had, of certain themes, probably similar to whoever, but it was just really rapid. Like I did 2 sessions in a weekend, and it's not that the day after I was just happier, like the happiest person in the world, but it's those 2 sessions that just built a much more rapid transformation. Like I was at a point in which I was always not going at home for how much tension and fatigue I had, and rebirthing, it just blew it away. So that's the first thing. The second, and which is still important to entrepreneurship because a lot of ego goes into entrepreneurship. So, and a lot of it's really tiring. Every job is hard, but entrepreneurship, it's really stressful. So not having having a bit less shadow, having a bit less tension helps with that. That's the first thing. The second thing is that as an entrepreneur, you need to take the perspective of the people you're selling to. So less ego helps to sell stuff. It's a banal thing, but it does. But the other thing is that just the idea of my own startup just came out of 3 days of hyperventilation, basically. Just like breathing, and just this idea emerged from my work. We have basically, not to advertise, but just to give context, we have a social collaboration platform for communities. So if you have a movement and you want to engage thousands of people in getting stuff done, and you want to leverage their passions and skills, I built a platform to do that. And I would never have been able to build it without being able to access these states. But what's interesting is that I was then able to maintain these states afterwards. And these are states like of intuition and creativity. So I think that this type of practice allowed me to think of things in a much more intuitive way. What that means is that if I think of something, and you know when you think of something, like you got to do something, you have a job, and you just have a smell that something is wrong, right? Like a smell that there is a smudge, the picture is not completely elegant. So through meditation and breathing and stuff like that, I learned to really trust those sensations, probe that sensation, not rationally, but just witnessing them. And then sort of intuitions would come that would add clarity. So for me, really thinking and meditation, when it comes to these things, have become the same thing. And this was very much thanks to holotropic breathing.
Wow, that's really interesting that you also got the idea for your startup.
Absolutely, 100%. And I keep getting new ideas for it.
Yeah, so it's almost like that unlocks a lot of creativity or intuition or something for you.
Yes.
And I can't help but think with your startup that you have and its purpose of helping people. I mean, that sounds very much what integral movement needs, right? Like, how have you been doing integral
I'm trying to build the integral web, essentially, which it is already happening, actually. Like it's very easy to predict the future of the internet if you use integral theory, actually. And like we can make a little exercise together to see whether the logic makes sense. Now, integral theory, if you apply it to say lower right quadrant, them, society, right? You would see society, if you have to apply integral theory, what you would be saying is that there's a next step, but there's also a reintegration of something that was lost before. So if we look at the holons of society, there are some holons that are just lost. The holons of tribe is just no longer there. We don't have tribes. Like, to have a tribe and talk to like-minded people, we need technology and infrastructure to talk all around the world. Like, but this is a reestablishment of those earlier holons, of being able to rebuild this one-on-one connections. I believe that the concept of community is a very important concept that the internet has helped people form again. You know, how many online communities, how many websites and stuff like that. And I just believe we haven't done enough of that. And you also have the world of the physical realm. You know, WeTipp, it's a great platform because it really worked to get people use the internet, get people off the internet. So you see, we're trying to look at how the internet is now and finding gaps. But what you can also do is, and this is a little bit more subtle, is think of patterns that you've seen in earlier evolutions and see how would they reflect today. So I always make the example of the bourgeois in say the 1700s. You know, this was these new guys coming around, they cluster together in corporations, they suddenly get vast economical power, and in 50 to 100 years, the whole of society shifts to Enlightenism and to a rational mode of thinking and so on and so forth. So what happened is that there was a mode of production, which was the mode of commerce, right? And the mode of commerce was in the hands of kings. And then it became to also be in the hands of little, the artisan and the farmer and the trader. But the minute they got together, they gained power, they gained sufficient energy to move everyone to the next stage. And so what we need to ask ourselves is, what are the means of production in this current structure of society? One would be user data. And What would be the next stage? Users get their data back and they begin to monetize it independently. That's an example of looking at a pattern in the past and trying to reestablish it in the now. And so there is, I don't know if you've heard about this concept of the decentralized web. It's the idea of, where everybody's hosting the internet independently, where data is interoperable and all that. I think that's the evolution of the internet from the lower right quadrant. And it's a very integral evolution because it's the idea to distribute ownership, redistribute assets to many other people. It's a next stage that includes the previous ones. It does not exclude them. Obviously, we need to find a good way to make sure that everybody gets on board, because now it's kind of just a crazy dream of many people. And but that's just an example of how you can use some of the patterns of integral theory to make little predictions, and then you build those predictions together into a cohesive vision.
Yeah, beautifully said. And I like how you emphasize the decentralization and that second tier aspect of decentralizing power and resources, while also having that integrative, that transcending and including aspect, and being able to creatively visualize the internet as being this kind of integral container. And I guess my question is, I think this is a question a lot of people have, is let's say that this lower right quadrant aspect that you've illustrated really comes online. Do you think that if that lower right technological development outruns our upper left or lower left,
we're screwed. We're completely screwed. Yes, I agree.
We're completely okay. Can you
if it doesn't happen, we're screwed. But it's also very unlikely it will happen. Like it's also very unlikely they will really catch on if we don't develop it here. So I could make an opposite argument that to make that come about, you can't just build code. You need to transform society. You need to build new structures of consciousness that can sustain that new society.
Right.
I see it more in an active sense of, if we want it to happen, we need to make sure that it at the same time happens in all these other areas. Right. And I think that if you look at the whole world of digital nomads today, these guys who are just traveling the world with their laptops, and if you had to sort of assess their general level of consciousness, you'd most likely find them at integral, I think. So that's already an interesting indication that something is happening. And those people are working differently. They have higher levels of freedom. They can live wherever they want. They work whenever they want. And I think higher states of freedom is a typical indication of new levels. But we definitely need to make an effort to include everybody else in this whole thing. And Facebook walls are not a good indication of the fact that we're anywhere close to having good integral conversations with everybody.
Right. So that may be a good segue into another topic I wanted to get with you, which was your piece on universal basic income, and also changing the way that we should educate people, and changing our education system to match the correlating changes in our techno-economic structures of production and so forth, and how that could also shape the consciousness, the left-hand quadrants to match the right-hand changes.
So the universal basic income, which is basically, ways in which we redistribute wealth to allow everybody to survive in a society where people don't need to work, is a perfect example of an issue that can only be resolved integrally. And the basic, most simple retort to universal basic income is twofold, actually. There are two retorts. One is, what are people going to do? Like, what are we going to do? Are we just going to get bored? Are we just going to kill each other and stuff like that? Which is saying implicitly, I think that the structures of mind that we have today are not able to sustain that level of freedom. And I believe that that's true. And I believe that that's true even for myself. I'll make you an example. If today I lost my company, if today, I realized that all this work I'm doing, someone else did it, and I just completely lost what I'm doing, I would be devoid of identity. So that would be a very good spiritual experience, but it would be hard to live like that, right? So while we do want people to be able to let go of their identity, We still want them to fit within society, because otherwise it's just too hard. It's not going to happen. It's just going to be revolution. It needs to be together. And the second level, which I'll get to afterwards, is the idea of, yes, if we have universal basic income, there will be 4 companies paying taxes for everybody else, and the world will be controlled by them, which touches the point of decentralization. But so one of the things if we go back to lower left quadrant, the idea is, if we want a free society, we need to build a mind that is ready for freedom. And I believe that the tenet of the educational system of the future must be freedom. You no longer train people to work, you train them to be free. And what does it mean to train to be free? First of all, it means to instill a sense of passion and curiosity. You no longer expect that the kid wants to come to school and learn about that. He doesn't have to. So the mode already changes. Is I need to get him interested, because if he's not interested after he leaves school, we're all screwed. If we taught kids today like this, I think things would be a lot better already.
Right.
And so another thing is, I need to instill in you the desire to work. And there is a lot of people who come from more or less good backgrounds, who have a profound desire to do stuff. So being rich is in no way something that denies you the desire for doing things. Let me make you another example. Discipline. We teach discipline to just take these little kids and fit them into the boxes where they'll have to be, so that when you send him there, when you send him to the house of your friends, he's going to well behave. And when you send him to the job interview, he's going to put a tie, and so on and so forth. In the context of freedom, discipline is even more important, but it is important in the context of having people attain goals. So for example, I talk from experience. I did martial arts I did karate for 12 years, and then I did other martial arts. And a lot of discipline is involved in learning martial arts, especially karate. And it's painful, but I feel that now it gives me an edge, because I have a lot more patience. I have a lot more discipline when it comes to my work. And so discipline gave me freedom. Mm-hmm. And kids love discipline because they understand it. But again, it needs to be framed in a way, this is supposed to free you. It's not supposed to shackle you. And, what just as an absurdity, what if kids were not obliged to go to school? We would be instantly forced to invent a school that it's insanely fun and that they want to go to. And it sounds insane, but the only reason we're not doing it is that we just haven't done the mental exercise enough. Just getting my phone charger. So one of the things that I would encourage to do is, let's make like the Tibetans do, but we do it about society. Let's make a mental exercise. Let's imagine a perfect school where everybody wants to go to. You see that imagination. And if you try to imagine it just a little bit, it will come, because your brain will fill the gaps. Your brain is smart. Your brain will find, but what we do this, think about it, and then a solution could be found. And I think we haven't been thinking about these issues in these terms long enough.
Yeah, well, the first thing that comes to my mind, and I have some experience working in alternative education. I actually worked in Estonia and for a couple of months at an alternative school that sounds exactly what you're describing. Mm-hmm. It was very small. It was technically like a homeschool, but a lot of emphasis on creativity, freedom. Kids get to develop their own curriculum.
So those freaky Northern Europeans.
Exactly. Yeah. All their alternative education. But something that I found very interesting was that these school systems, their success in a large part depends on, in integral terms, the center of gravity or stage of development of the kids. And so some of the kids, I think, who were like at more like a green tendencies and, a lot of spiritual inclinations at an early age, they thrived, right? These kids hate the conventional stuff you in a box education. But there are other kids who I think were more, coming from different backgrounds and more maybe like red or even amber. And some of that freedom and creativity and the responsibility that was bestowed on the kid in the educational context was not really compatible with what they needed. And so my question is, from an integral perspective, how do we design an educational system that hits everyone and includes everyone, and no matter what stage of development you're at?
Yeah, I think the diagnosis is that was a pluralist-driven educational society, which forgot that there are previous structures and
Right,
forgot how to include those. So, and one of the things when I was saying discipline, in a sense, that's what I was talking about. It's this idea that, you know, discipline is good. Kids who misbehave often end up being cops, because once they discover discipline, they get high on it, because it finally tells them, you know, like, you know, kids who are confused in their attachment relationships, they generally feel kind of, they don't know based on what they will do, whether they will be accepted or not. And so actually discipline gives them a lot of peace, because they basically understood, as long as I do X, Y, and Z, I'm a good boy. Mm-hmm. So there is a great benefit to that, and we need to recognize it. And I do agree that there is a huge percentage of the population that feels uncomfortable with this, but that they get kids who are very crazy just out of this difficulty to hoarding them and controlling them. So I don't have exactly an answer to how that would look like, but I can add another element that could perhaps be of interest, which is the idea that if you're looking to build an integral mode of education, you can't just have the freaking teacher and 30 kids. Right. You're basically saying there are this kind of like Lord of the Flies group of kids who are just traumatizing each other with their stupidity, poor kids. And then there is this dude who is just entirely representative of the rest of society. So you're putting a lot of responsibility of that one person, and you're missing a lot of levels in between. And I think that this is slowing down kids. If kids were taught by kids 1-year-old or 2-year-olds or 3-year-old or 5-year-old than them, they would be forced to translate cognitive levels constantly. The main reason we're not integral is that we don't spend enough time with people with different levels. Like, just, I mean, white people are homophobic. They just haven't met gay people. Like, white people hate black people. You haven't met a black guy. It's okay to hate them. They're weird. Like a black person, you've never seen that. I'd be weirded out too if I had never met one. And so a lot of the problem of the allergy that people get for earlier or subsequent stages comes from the fact that they just meet them on Facebook message boards. They just appear long enough to hate them, not long enough to see them as human beings. And so I think that within education, there is a lot of opportunities to just get kids to teach each other. They love to do that. They'll feel important, it will train their cognitive capabilities, and they will themselves be forced to sort of reconcile all these different structures, accompanied obviously by adults of different ages. And I think that also in our adult life, like I don't know you, but I don't spend any time around people of like kids, for example. But anytime I do it, it just feeds me a little bit, because they're crazy. They think in a way that I don't think anymore. And I think I would, you know, probably stay younger mentally if I get to have that experience. That's why old people like to be with young people. So
yeah, I think what you're alluding to is the importance of developmental diversity.
I agree.
And not only having, you know, diversity of, you know, other traditional kinds of diversity, but interacting with people of different stages too, and how that can really open your mind and give you different perspectives. And it makes me think too about how UBI could be helpful in that by having more freedom, not everyone has to move to the city. You can then move to the country or wherever, because you have more freedom with the money. And then you can start interacting with a lot, you know, wider crowd of different people from different backgrounds. You know, conservatives start interacting more with liberals. The black guy will be your neighbor, that kind of thing, you know?
Yeah. Well, you come from US, so I'll boast a little bit about how, for once, Europeans like have an edge.
Oh, right.
I think that Europeans are really, are really doing well in this sense, in the sense that we are a group of 30 so nations, all near each other at the cost of a 50 euro flight from each other. So Europe is very integral. That's the thing. Like, Europe is a quite integral part of the world, because we've had such a huge exchange. The people who work with me are, you know, I have a Spanish person, a German person, a Hungarian person, I have Albanians, and we do not meet under the umbrella of a single culture. We're not, you know, foreign people, but in America. No, we're different nationalities, but we have a very sort of equal exchange under a light umbrella of European identity. And So that's one thing. But the second thing is that I believe that one of the tenets of the future, if we want to again imagine ideal society, is free travel. Like if you have free travel, you have no wars immediately. Because the minute enough people make enough friends in other places, they're not going to want to bomb them. That's it. Like it's as simple as that. And the European Commission has proven that, in the sense that they've put maybe 8 billion on a 7-year process on the Erasmus Plus program. And the Erasmus Plus program is a program to give money to young people to travel around Europe and say, study abroad for a year or live together for a week. And this was my work before becoming an entrepreneur. So for me, and actually to my point about how we want to, if we had to have a recipe for solving the problems of society, intercultural dialogue, which includes interlevel dialogue, is a key. It's better than meditation. It breaks your ego much faster than looking at a wall to meet a weird person and have to deal with them. And I think in Europe there are really, really, like, if you want to study how that could be done well, I think in Europe there are great case histories. On the other hand, Brexit shows that if you don't include levels also in age, you're screwed. If you only build an identity among young people, but you don't include the older people who vote, then you get these allergies where people leave.
Right. Yeah. And I think I think it was Francis Fukuyama or some political scientist was saying that the European conceives of their identity very differently than like the American, because in a lot of ways with the EU, it really is this kind of post-nationalist, cosmopolitan, mini global federation, right? Where everyone is interacting and you can just you can just go anywhere, and how that breaks down the bound. And it is funny how it does seem like on the Integral Forum, a disproportionate amount of integral practitioners are from Europe, right? I'm like, where are all the?
I wonder why. Yes. You guys get all come to Europe. It's fine. You can come. And also one of the things is that we've seen nationalism. We've seen my wife, she's Belarusian, and she lived 2 years in Germany, and her grandmother like literally cried when she told her she was going to Germany, because she saw the other Germans. And we live in a place where we were literally murdering each other 70 years ago, and now we work together, we drink together, and we make fun of each other. Like, I have a guy in my company who is German. Every 2 days we're making fun of him for, German past history related things. And I mean, it will sound silly or disrespectful, but it's as if, when you have a group of friends and one of your friends did something really stupid, but all the other friends, they accept him, but they get to make fun of him, right? That's how we feel when it comes to these things. And I think the fact that we've gotten to a place where, again, we were murdering each other 7 years ago, and now we can talk, we can be together. It's a great thing. And in Europe, we have an allergy for nationalism. We see it still popping up a lot. But also, I mean, there are people who are ready to fight it, because we've seen it and we've been told about it. So it's part of our genetic cognitive programming that, you got to be careful when you get a little bit too nationalistic. We completely, like, for us, and also patriotism is just completely insane, like, to us. Like, wearing a flag of your country on your body in Europe means you're a fascist generally. In Italy, if I wore an Italian flag, people would think, okay, he's really right-wing. Whereas in US, that's a mainstream thing to do. Right. So to us, the way nationalism and patriotism happens in the US, it's not bad, but it's completely out of the ordinary for us.
That's unless it's at a soccer game, right?
Okay, yeah, but you see, actually, no, you made a really, really good point, which is sublimation. You don't lose national, like, you gotta hate somebody every once in a while, right? Like, but you hate them for 90 minutes. Obviously, there are people who go a little overboard, but the idea is, and I love this idea of the Olympic Games, right? In the Olympic Games, you had countries at war, but when there was the Olympic Games, at least the story goes that they would stop waging war. And this is really a process of sublimation, of saying, like, we have this drive, we accept it, but every once in a while we do it, we keep it, we still hate each other, we still harm each other, but in a more friendly way. And I think that we need more of that. Like, we should have a World Day of Peace where we all just, fight, but with like fluffy baseball bats or something like that. These are silly concepts, but if we're building a new world, why not think of these things? Like, why not think of, let's have a day where we all agree not to murder each other, and we find another way to really express our anger and hate. Again, absurd, but it buys into this idea that when you transcend, you need to re-include. There are many kids who are taught by their parents not to be violent, not to make violent games and so on and so forth. And those are the kids who afterwards are going to be really curious and interested in those things. I think it works also for societies. They want to fight. It's fun, but better if you do it with less murdering.
Right. Yeah. And I'm of course an outsider who watches a few videos here and there on YouTube on European politics, and I've been aware of some resurgences of nationalism, like in Germany, for example. Obviously, like Brexit, and then in France you had like Marine Le Pen and other instances of nationalism. And it seems like a lot of that is coming as a backlash against immigration, especially like Muslim immigration. I'm just curious, like, what is the whole
what's up with that
attitude in Italy and in Europe in general towards the tensions of immigration and nationalism?
So it definitely works. Like, it works to keep those politicians in power. That for sure is just like it's been really helpful. And if we want to explain it integrally, it is still the shortcoming of the left. It's the left who, in its and I that's the world I come from, but it's in its pluralism and infinite acceptance and so on and so forth, it is not able to listen and communicate effectively to the concerns of people for whom those guys are aliens. Like, I always joke because we forgot how being racist feels like.
Right.
And I make this analogy saying, like, imagine you have a house and aliens finally meet us. And aliens look insanely weird. They behave really weird. They smell weird. They make noise. You don't know what they're doing and what they're plotting because they don't speak your language, and they're living right above you. You're not going to be happy to have them living above you. And the problem is that it's a strong analogy, but this is what it feels for so many people to encounter diversity. If you've never met a Muslim, if you've never met a black person, if you've never met a gay person, they will feel like that. And the problem is that then you have a right that capitalizes on this fear because it's that rational. They know, they're just not very compassionate, but they know. And then you have a left who just doesn't understand the racism of these people. It has forgotten being racist, and it does not understand like how to talk to people who are having understandable concerns. And help them see beyond. Like, I truly believe that most people would be very happy to even give up part of their well-being, give up part of their safety to welcome others. There was a beautiful video in Naples made about Neapolitans who are, one of the funniest types of Italians, saying that they have no money, but they're willing to help all the migrants. So there are people who, even if they're poor, they're willing to do that. But the minimum point is that they need to see those guys as human beings. And the left, who was the one who could do that, the one who could bridge this dialogue, failed at doing so because it is intolerant of intolerant people. So Ken Wilber talks a lot about this, pluralist versus rational conflict. And I think we're just seeing that. That's exactly what we're seeing right now, with different, whereas in US, it comes with other topics, transgender rights and all those things. To us, it's just Muslims and refugees and immigrants, because it's just an easier stereotype on which to place our attention on. And obviously, like, you need to acknowledge the concerns of people. It is likely that if you get a bunch of poor, less educated people, they're gonna do a little bit more crime. It is not with the attitude of denial that you welcome people. It's with the attitude of, we can take it. Like, It's going to be hard. It's going to suck. Some of us are going to pay the consequences of it, but it's worth it because they're humans. We're going to be ultimately better. This is a realistic concept. Like, you can't disagree with all the statements that I made. You may disagree with the fact that we're going to be ultimately better, but I've at least acknowledged your fear that things may get worse before they get better. And just the left is too afraid to do this. And the reason why the left is afraid to do this is because it saw nationalism. We saw what it means to discriminate against people, and we have an allergy towards that. So obviously, Mr. Wilbur, he's a bit allergic to these pluralist people who want to love everybody. In Europe, that's a very valid allergy because we've seen the opposite of it. We've seen what that does, and we would much rather choose the allergy to intolerance than anything else. And the historical background in Europe of the damages of nationalism and hating people is so much that before you're able to think in these ways we're doing right now, you need to have a lot more elements. Like, and I've been having I do my Facebook meditation. I think this would be like the millennial meditation, which is like, just look at a post and just witness for 10 seconds before you answer.
Oh boy.
It's been very helpful. And what I've been doing lately is that I've been applying integral theory to my Facebook discussions. And as predicted by Ken, it works. If you are talking to someone who's expressing these concerns at either rational, mythical, or pluralistic level, and you map it for them, and you tell them, I think this is happening, and you describe it, so many people agree with me. And not just with me, but with this idea. And it proves that, integral speaking kind of makes people agree because it includes everybody. And if we want to have a cool campaign, we should just have like millions of people, just integral people engaging in Facebook rants. And I think that they could just bring some order and understanding to each other.
That's beautiful. That's actually one of my current projects and visions, is to create a very specific guideline or a toolkit of how to have an integral conversation with people who are not like into integral, right?
I would love to help you with that. If you ever need, I'm your guy.
So here, let me just add, let me just put you on the spot here. So I'd say I'm on Facebook and like in the US, right? I'm probably like a more amber traditionalist stage of development. Those damn Mexicans are coming in. We need Trump to build a big wall. We need to bring crime and drugs, and we need to build a wall, keep them out. What would, as someone coming from integral, what would you tell me?
So first thing is, I'm not sure I would definitely even tell you anything. But the first thing is that let's break it down. Let's try this. Let's play with this. The first thing I would do is not right. The first thing I would do is, okay, what's happening here? What I would try to understand, like, how the hell is this person seeing this thing as they are? And the biggest point is that it's not enough to have the concept of integral theory. You need to really have a first person perspective using these different maps. So the first thing I think, and I'm trying to do that right now, is this idea that there is scarcity. There's not infinite resources. And poor people understandably tend to feel like that. They tend to feel like there's not a lot to share here, and I can attest by the fact that I don't have a lot. So it's a logical conclusion that if someone else comes in, I will have less. It's a really rational argument. It's not a complete argument, but it is a concern worth acknowledging, right? Like, you don't want to be in conflict with these other people. So what the left does often, and it's a viable strategy, but ultimately it fails, is to say, no, look, I understand your concern. I also understand that you're a human, so you know that the other person is a human, which helps me tap into their humanity. I'm implying that they're human, right? I'm telling you, I understand that you're a good person and that you don't mean negative to those people and that you want to protect yourself, your family, and your livelihood. But we're talking about peanuts in competition between poor people, where the real wealth is completely somewhere else. So we have some people who draw walls and separate us and keep all the money and just keep us fighting because it keeps us distracted. And right-wing people love conspiracy theories. So that's a good way to get them on your side. You shift you shift the blame from the little guy to the big guy. And that's why Sanders was so popular.
Right.
Because Sanders was providing an outlet for the same frustration, which was probably even more rational. And people don't like to hate people, ultimately. Like, I would much rather hate a rich person than a Mexican. I don't also want to hate rich people because I'd love to be rich at some point. But and that's the other problem, is where that this argument works to get some more people on your side, like Sanders did. It does not work when you're talking to rich people, because rich people are going to hate that argument. And so that's a whole other interpretation. But you see what I did. What I did is I tried to find what would make that emotion completely rational and valid. And if you add to that, there is also the other thing of just some things are rude to a traditional mind. Like, it sounds like a stereotype, but like, if you're loud, you're being disrespectful of me. And people who come from South America tend to be louder than other people, and it's not rude. But the thing is that to someone who does not have the concept of culture, someone who does not have the concept that in their mind they're not doing anything rude, his only way to interpret their weird different behavior is they really want to piss me off. They're doing it on purpose, right? Because he's never lived in Mexico. He's never been in a party in Mexico, and he's never enjoyed being loud. So get that guy to a party with Mexican people and getting drunk. Sounds banal, but I can attest to the fact that that's basically what European Commission is doing. It's just getting young people together to live together. And ultimately, it's just that contact, informal contact, in context where there is no center of gravity. When you remove the center of gravity and people meet outside of it, they meet halfway. So when you take one person from each country and you put them in a single room, that they're forced to find a better, greater balance, because there is no center of gravity to fall back. And generally, the center of gravity is immediately higher. So it's very, like, if you take a Nazi to an intercultural exchange meeting, you will see them in 3 days immediately take on different points of views and perspectives. I was once in Georgia doing a training course, Georgia Caucasus, not Georgia, US. And it was a training course on international project management with people from all around the world. And there was the evaluation form at the end. And this Georgian guy who at the end basically just said, there was this episode where he met they were having a discussion and someone said the word gay. And he just was like, gay people, I beat gay people. And he was really proud to say that he would beat gay people, because in his regular context, people would be like, yes, you're a good guy. You're doing your job. And he met 3 people just looking at him like that. And on top of that, he met a really big guy who said, like a black, like I think it was Indian, English Indian. He's like, I'm gay. You want to beat me? And then it was like, no, you're okay. It sounds like it sounds like a banal thing, but in those little moments of incongruency, he had to reconcile the fact that there was 3 minds agreeing on a different thing that he had never seen agreement about. And what that guy wrote on the evaluation form at the end of the project was just one thing: I learned that also gay people can be nice people. And it works so. And Georgia is the worst country when it comes to this kind of discrimination. So I'm very positive about the possibility to solve these things, because I've seen it in action. It's expensive, takes hard work, but it costs less than wars. So we should probably try to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love that example. And it's so funny how a lot of people like us can take it for granted, but when you see someone like that have that experience, like, wow, the exposure really does change people's minds.
It does. It works.
Do you?
And it's
go ahead.
It's like meditation. It just forces you to go beyond the ego. For language to function, you need to get a little bit outside of yourself. For intercultural dialogue to work, you need to get a lot outside of yourself. And at some point, it just happens. Sorry, you were saying.
Well, I was just curious that it seems in a lot of ways Europe as a whole may be more primed to move into an integral stage before maybe like the United States. Mm-hmm. Do you think, has there ever been like an integral kind of a politician that you know of in Europe? And do you think that if one were to run an integrally informed campaign, maybe not explicitly, do you think that someone would have a good chance of winning?
I've been obsessing about this lately, and I am 100% convinced that if an integral politician comes about, he will win like easy.
Really?
Yeah, I'm like 100% sure. And I've been talking to politicians lately. Like I've been talking, I have I have a friend who's like, on his Facebook, he says like his name and then 2029, he's saying he's already running as prime minister. And there's another party, like there are some things happening. So I don't know whether he will succeed. And I made this experiment. It's like, I'll sit you down and I'll explain you how to win an election. I literally did this like a week ago. And I explained them the process of the concept of levels and how that applies to, the different conflicts we're having and quadrants. And the guy was just like, he was thinking, yeah, this could work. It makes so much sense that as a politician, his job is to take these concepts and translate them into communication. And he is saying, I'm already trying to have a communication where I can include everybody. And he's like, this is gold because this gives me a map to do that. So that guy is an integral guy if he accepts this, but having the maps make him a lot more efficient. So I'm absolutely willing to bet that we need to build a worldwide integral party. And it could work. It could be very effective.
That is amazing to hear. That is absolutely inspiring. And it's funny, because we're in America, we're all shaping up for the 2020 election. Who's going to take on Trump? And there's like 5,000 people running on the Democratic ticket. And I'm 26 years old, but I was like, if I was 35, you have to be 35 to become president. I'm like, if I was 35, I would freaking run for president. Like, I mean, I wouldn't win probably, but just getting the message out there. And as you alluded to, the brilliance of the integral model is in its stages of development and so forth, even quadrants. It really gives you the most holistic and robust messaging framework possible, in which you can theoretically hit everyone's needs and concerns and core values.
Yeah.
And, I think even if someone doesn't win necessarily, just the campaign itself would be enough to get the consciousness snowballing towards an integral consciousness.
Yeah, but don't shoot to lose. If you gotta do it to win, dude. You have 11 years to candidate yourself. So if you do it to win. And I think that if I can sort of read inside your saying of, I would not win, which in a sense, you're not saying I would not win. I would say an integral politician may not win, but it would be beneficial. What you're implying is to this idea that there's just not that many integral people out there. But I think there's a more subtle problem, is that, and this comes from my left-wing background, is that they're not unionized. They're not working as a collective. You like integral people are just all kind of doing their own thing. The integral movement is a lot about exchanging ideas and talking, but it's not about saying, no. Let's take all the things we're doing and let's build it as a cooperative, as a collective, as a union, as a economical structure that obviously will eventually include everybody. But where we really work together, we build a project where we unite all integral people. And this is one of the things I want to do with my platform. I want to build a social network for integral people. And by integral people, I don't mean people who have the label of integral, because those are of that 4 or 5%, they're a 4 or 5%, the one that know it by its name. But the thing is that they're out there and you can find them right now. Like I had a conversation with my colleagues last night where we were talking about consciousness and politics and evolution. And we were thinking, wow, we're the smartest guys. Like nobody has these conversations, right? And then I go on YouTube the next day and I Googled some consciousness thing. And I get a guy who made a 7-part video, just basically the conversation that I had the night before. And he clearly did not know about integral theory. So the thing is that they're out there. They're the people who have this consciousness. The beauty of it is that, and I think the problem with integral theory is that we have this kind of sense that since many of us have developed into integral thought, thanks to integral theory, we think that you need integral theory to become integral. But the truth is that evolution happens no matter whether you give it a name or not. So there is a ton of people out there that are just coming to the same integrated conclusions. I bet that anybody working on decentralization would enjoy a conversation on consciousness. It's just like to think of those things, you already need to, your mind needs to be warped a little bit. So I think that we need to do a job of scouting these people who haven't yet given a name to what they're doing and bring them under but in a collective of people who just work as a structured, collaborative, fluid organization.
Let's do it. I mean, this is like one of the most exciting things
I already have the technology to do it like tomorrow. Like
awesome.
That's what I did. I built a company to enable movements to do what they have to do. And this idea that I told you I had this morning. And I told my employees and collaborators this morning that, crap, we should just start from integral people. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's not supposed to be an exclusive thing, but I think that those are the ones who are most likely to get everyone on board from every other level, because they're able to communicate to those people.
Now, I love what you mentioned is one of the problems, and because I see the exact same thing, and that there's so much diversity of thought in the integral community. And I think that's a good thing in a lot of ways. But when it comes to specific policy positions, and I'm fortunate enough that I have a lot of integral friends that I talk to regularly, but everyone, like, for example, like, I have 5 different integral friends. They're all backing a different candidate in the election. I know some integral people who even voted for Trump. And the policies that I'm for, that I believe are best for the country, like I'm for universal basic income, I'm for universal healthcare. I have a lot of friends, integral friends, who are not for that stuff. And so it's like, how to unify around policy positions I found kind of challenging.
That I think that the problem is not the end policy you get to, but how integral was the conversation you were having about it with that person. Because you clearly haven't understood, like, if you haven't understood that, like, let me just, if you haven't understood them, it means that the communication was not efficient, which means that you both did not use the integral model to understand where you both come from to come to a joint position. So you see, part of the problem is that we understand the integral theory, we apply it to the world, but in one-on-one communication, it's much harder because you need to be very quick. You need to have a very good way to communicate and probe into what people are saying. And the maps of integral theory help you probe, but you need to, it's an exercise. You need to get used to it. And honestly, I really believe that if you have an integral conversation, you generally don't come to a strong disagreement. You generally you are at the end that you have more agreement than before. And if the parties are really curious about figuring out why the hell would the other person do this and the other person do that, at the end of that conversation, a third inclusive position should have come out. Because that's the whole point of integral theory, to understand each other. It's a map for compassion. That's all it is. It's just a map to be sure that you can take someone else's point of view, but it takes a lot of exercise to do it in the first person. And I think that this is one of the problems of integral theory, is that we studied in the third person. When I tell you the we quadrant, you think of the quadrant down left. You know, and I'm not saying that you do it. I'm saying I also do it. But what you should do is, in your present here and now awareness, what is my experience of a collective identity? And at that level, that's we. That's you begin to notice as a meditative practice. Where is the them quadrant in your life? Are you stressed about work? Do you feel the stress of work? That's the them quadrant in your subjective experience. So this is a first person perspective, but the idea is that you only have one consciousness. So if the integral model exists, it exists within it, in first person. And I actually, in the last months, have had a lot of strong, even some Kensho experiences, just by doing this, by forcing myself to, like, you know, you would listen to Ken Wilber or something like that, and you not think of it intellectually. Just stop, press space bar, and imagine it in first person, first person, first person, first person. And every piece of the integral model can be experienced in first person and all its combination. And I truly believe that an integral enlightenment is an integral enlightenment where just it all comes together. You just figure it all out. I don't think we're there yet, but in a first person, your enlightenment includes just a profound I amness with all the structures of the model. And I think it's possible. I think that's where that's the next type of awakening, you have nirvikalpa, savikalpa, nirvikalpa, and then you have this integral thing where just you're not, one with the emptiness and one with the form, but you can rock climb like a badass, and you can talk about really complicated things because it's all very clear and it's all part. And I think that it really is a third level of enlightenment. And I hope someone will get to there by before we die. So at least we get to see it.
Maybe it'll be us.
Oh, well, I'm working on it. At least I'm working on it for sure.
Yeah, what I love hearing you emphasize is this aspect of completely embodying integral theory, completely embodying and manifesting that in the world. And one of the things that I've been working on with a few friends of mine is helping people to bridge the gap between I go home at night and I read Ken Wilber's books, these extremely abstract theoretical frameworks, and then I go back to work in my daily life and there's no connection, there's no confluency. It's just like, I go to my integral group and meditate, and then I go back to my normal job in which I don't think of anything integral for the rest of the day. And I think what you're doing is you've really focused on bridging that and really embodying integral theory in your conversations with people, in your work, etc.
Yeah.
But for some people, I think that bridging that is not quite as intuitive or natural to them. And so what if you were to give us some advice on, if you're just reading Ken Wilber, maybe you're new to integral, what are the first steps someone can take to start to really practice that and embody it in their life in every way?
Let me ask you a question. You said, I meet with my integral group and we meditate. You probably discuss and then you meditate. When you meditate, it's fair to assume that you're probably doing, Zen meditation or those kind of like typical meditation to wake up, right? At best, you're doing some shadow integration. And what's coming up now that Ken Wilber is starting to talk about is really the concept of integral meditation. And the concept of integral meditation is that how can you recognize your current state with integral theory? So you sit down and you say, let's reown, let's integrate. You need to integrate it. Let's feel my body. Let's feel my emotions. That these are sort of pieces of the physical body. So you see the three layers. So I start from the body and I say, I integrate my emotion and my anger, and I just go into this. And then at that point, one I comes up. And then you're like, okay, what is this I in the levels? You don't have to label it, but you understand that you've accessed a lower repressed self. And so that's one first thing. I've used the concept of the body, the different states, body, subtle, and causal. I've focused on the body. You could combine it in thousands of ways. You can reown a shadow while witnessing your sense of subtle energies while doing causal witness. Like you could do all those crap, but I think it's not needed. So you can just go to the body, feel your emotion, identify. But that's the thing. One of the things that Ken Wilber says is that the shadow, and obviously we're talking about reowning a shadow, always has a direction. And where is that direction if not somewhere within the 4 quadrants? If you have anger, you have it at something that is in the quadrant. You can have an anger at the whole universe, which is the entire thing, but it's still directed at something. And so what you would do is find that direction of that experience in the here and now and map it with aqua. And it fucking works in the sense that it gives a lot of clarity. And when you're talking to someone else, you try to do the same thing. So for example, yesterday I was with my 2 friends, a Spanish and a German, who happened to be together. And so it's lovely to see them argue because their arguments are so ripe with cultural differences. And basically she was saying something about the issue of empathy and how she was interpreting some of his behavior as lack of empathy for a single person who was behaving in a mindless, sort of thoughtless way. Mm. And he kept saying, no, you're not understanding what I'm saying. You're not understanding what I'm saying. And then I said, okay, wait, explain me a little bit what the hell you're saying. So what we understood in the end is he was not upset at the person. He was upset at the entire idea that there's an infinite amount of people who, due to none of their fault, are mindless and do stupid things that annoy others. So he had no anger for the person doing something stupid on the road. just annoyed in the idea of the structural, collective, objective inevitability of that state of mind, which is a really complex thing to be upset about. Like, I've never been upset about something like that. So it took me like 10 minutes to unpack that. And it was really like, I really sat him down. It was like, okay, let's unpack it. I used the model. And the thing is that when I present him my outcome, I think this is what you're saying. He was like, yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. So again, the answer to your question is integral model in the first person. That's it. Just find it in your present awareness. It is there. Like, it's not pointing at abstract things. It's pointing at things that you're in your moment experiencing. And that's why I believe there is an integral enlightenment, because it just has to include all of the quadrants in here and now, in your present experience. So that would be one of my things. Just think, when you think of subtle body, okay, try and find it. It's a theoretical thing. Okay, I do some Tai Chi. No, what does that mean in terms of your experiences? How do you charge it? How do you access it? The dream state and the waking state and the causal state. Like, there's a lot going on in those areas. And for example, one of the things that happened to me recently is that last week, I've had 2 nights separate that I had like 3 hours of conscious dreaming. Like, full on, super lucid, get in and out, like just like Ken says it should be, right? And it had happened to me before, but it was so hard to narrow down the steps that got me to that state. Using integral theory, I can build the map and I can replicate states. So what that means is that if you use the integral model, it's also way easier to lock states, because you can explain states much better with the integral model. I do feel that the integral model is sometimes too generic. Like, we need to go a little bit into breaking down further things. So I'll make you an example. He sometimes says, to wake up, just witness, right? Just witness the mind. But there's a billion ways you can witness the mind, and nobody's telling us which one is better. Should I witness my full identification in the body? Should I witness just thoughts that manifest? Should I witness a sensation in the body? And the truth is that they don't come out sporadically. If you're witnessing your identities, because that's where you decided to place your attention. I believe that one of the big misunderstandings is that while the process of witnessing is neutral, you always place your attention onto something. You cannot not place your attention on something. You can't witness without having something to witness. And you can always choose what to witness. That's literally the only thing we get to choose, more or less. And we don't really get a lot of guidance into that. If I can witness the whole of the integral model in my consciousness, I need very detailed instructions as to what I should do at all points. And also, some practices don't work sometimes. So how do you hack that? That's one way. And if you want, next time I can share you a little bit more. I wrote like a system that automatically calculates how to get resolve when a practice is not working. I kind of built an algorithm for that. So I have like a series of meditative practices, and you click one, and if you get stuck, it automatically derives from the type of practice what things you could do to get unstuck, including what other type of specular practices. So these I think are the little details that we need in this present age, because it's also much harder to awaken in society. We don't get to go to I think we would all be freaking Buddhas if we could go to the mountain, but we're not in the mountain, we're in society. And the truth is that if you took Buddha and you put him in an office, I think he would freak out. Like, again, when we say an integral enlightenment, it's an enlightenment that can work in the office. And we haven't seen that. Like, I mean, I love Ken Wilber, but he's an intellectual. Like, he gets to spend his life to think and meditate. So that's what he had to include in his own enlightenment. I am lucky enough that I have a really stressful life as an entrepreneur. And you're beginning to see a lot of entrepreneurs who are meditating. And I believe that when those guys awake, it's going to be an interesting awakening, because that it will have to have included all these very stressful, weird lives that they're doing. And I think that to be able to include the real world into awakening, we need the integral model. The integral model is just the perfect thing to make sure you can be and you can awaken while still staying in the freaking world and doing things. And it's the bodhisattva idea, I think, is just, it's now becoming more possible just because we have more frames, we have more structures, and society is evolving. So obviously we can all work a little bit less and stuff like that. So I think we're ready. We're getting there. So we can start uniting all the integral guys and working on it.
Well, this has been an absolutely enlightening and brilliant and illuminating conversation. And I'm so grateful to have met you and hear all of your thoughtfulness and insights and just intelligence. So thank you so much. And can you just tell us before we end where people can find your website or business or something?
This is probably the first time I've ever spoken publicly about these thoughts that I have, these things. So I don't write a lot, I don't publish a lot. So I have just a SoundCloud account called Damiano, and there are many other Damianos. So you can't find much, but to me, it's come a little bit. I've commented. The reason I reached out to you is because I felt lately that I've understood the integral model a little bit better. After 10 years of studying it, just things are starting to feel clear. Like, you give me a guy who hates Mexicans, and it takes me just 30 seconds to kind of get a probable sense. And I'm not saying that I understand everything, but in my own personal experience, it is unwinding recently. So now I'm more enthusiastic about sharing things because I feel that they make sense. And or I'm happy to bounce with people who can kind of mirror that and tell me what doesn't make sense. But if we have then these kind of discussions, it's so much easier to come to new insights. So yeah, and yeah.
Well, wonderful, and I'll share a link on the to your SoundCloud, and I just want to say I really look forward to doing more of these with you, and we'll definitely be collaborating off.
I'll be very happy.
Yeah, so thank you so much, and hope to talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao.
Ciao.
Ciao.